Hey, this video is about sex and gender. If you are alt-righty and wish to keep your ignorance, which some of my viewers and students definitely have been, then please feel free to click off this now. It is not worth your time. If you are actually curious about the difference between sex and gender and how they are cultural and all that sort of stuff, stick around, because I'm going to talk about it. So, here's the deal. In several other languages, like Swedish, sex and gender are the same word. So they mean exactly the same thing. The sex that you have is the biological sex that you have is considered to be your gender because they don't mean different things. But in English, or a language that about a fifth of the world speaks at this point, sex and gender are different. Sex is what kind of plumbing you have, and gender is what role you fill. And gender roles, depending on culture, are very strictly defined, or at least used to be very strictly defined. Now, the problem is, and I'm going to explain something. I don't personally have any background in this, but at the same time, I recognize that other people do, and those people are smarter than me about this particular thing. Being against transgender people is inherently a little bit racist. I know, if you're going to go ahead and comment, go ahead and do that now. But if you hear me out, there were lots of cultures that we would consider primitive now that had more than two genders, that had roles for people who were in between, or roles for people who moved back and forth, or roles for people who just didn't conform to the gender normalization that they had at that time period. Now, I don't know enough about this, although there are certainly people who do, who can talk about Aboriginal multi-genders, or you can talk about African ones, or you can talk about Native American ones. I know those are called two-spirit people. If you are interested in that, look it up. You have the entirety of human knowledge at your fingertips, and a lot of also bullshit. So the problem for me is that I was raised by lesbians in Central Texas in the 80s. At the time, we had just gotten to where women could have children without men, with the test tube babies, and it was a big deal. My mom used a man to make me, but did not keep him around. So the problem is that until I was 6, I did not have a lot of men around who represented masculinity. There were some family friends, most of whom were gay, but the truth is that I didn't have men around until my stepfather, Don. So and Don was not a normal man. I honestly think Don might have been a little queer. I don't mean like wanting to have sex with men, but in defying the gender roles aspect. He was not the energy of men that I have understood is fairly aggressive, whereas I'm making a lot of assumptions here because I really don't know. I've tried to ask. I've literally asked dozens, if not hundreds of people, what makes a man? And the problem is that it goes back to a disclaimer, a logical fallacy, where people say no real man does, and there's a logical fallacy called no true Scotsman, which is the idea that there are certain people who are gatekeepers to this idea, that say no true Scotsman would ever be friends with an Englishman, or no true Scotsman would ever wear underpants with a kilt, or no true and so it's and the more modern version is no true Christian, which is, my church is better than your church, and if you do this, you're not really a Christian. I've been dealing with over here a lot of no true Muslims. A lot of my students will guilt my other students for not being Muslim enough, because they're guardians and gatekeepers of this idea of what it means to be a real Muslim. But and that's the thing. They feel like they can bully other people. And it's one of those things, it's not central to conservative people. There are a lot of people on the left who are like, oh, you're not a real liberal if you believe in borders. Not a real liberal if you believe in gun control, whatever your pet cause is. And yes, some gatekeeping is natural and necessary and good. But the problem is that the male stereotypes I grew up with were less than positive. You know, real men smoke cigarettes. Real men have guns and don't cry. Real men are real men hit their wives when their wives want to cheat on them. Real men don't let their wives leave even if they are crying and desperately want to. You know, real men did all of this stuff. And the problem is that I knew some men who were straight, who were not gender queer, who did the dishes. Real men don't do dishes. Real men don't do laundry. Real men don't sew. Whatever. All these things that I grew up with that were what real men did, I knew people who didn't do that. And so it kind of made the concept fuzzy to me. Because having a penis didn't really make you men. And this concept was not introduced to me by gay people or even by like women. There were men who said, you're not a real man if you don't. And so that implied that there were real men and not real men. And that there were people who had penises who weren't men. And the problem for me is that I don't really know what it means to be a man. And, you know, it's something I very much worked at being that role. I very much worked at trying to be a man. But I was also raised in a household where, like, being a man was bad. Because whenever I would help my mom set up the VCR, and she'd be like, oh, you're so smart, but don't be like them. My mom would have these parties with her female friends, and they'd all come over. They'd be like, oh, he's so sweet, he's so polite. Don't be a man. Don't be like a man. So for me, I had these conflicting messages because my culture wanted me to be a man. It wanted me to be manly, never cry, smoke cigarettes, eat red meat. And, I conformed to the eating red meat part. I got really into meat and potatoes. But at the same time, there were aspects where, real men don't cry. I cried all the time. Cried a well-made commercial. Those of you who have joined this channel probably already know that. I've mentioned it in class. I am very tough physically. I can take a punch. But commercials, yeah, they get me. Cried in Bridgerton, for God's sake. Well-made emotional things, they make me cry. And I have done projects with my hands. I have been a craftsman. I am not still a craftsman. Now I'm an academic. But it's not... People never said, oh, professors aren't real men. Oh, writers aren't real men. So it's one of those things where I never really understood what it meant to be a man. And at the same time, never really understood what it meant to be a woman. Because there were a bunch of people gatekeeping that too, who said, well, real women don't blah. Or real women have blah. There's all these cultural messages. And I had lots of students who didn't understand the idea of additional gender. And the way that I described it to them that worked best for me is, imagine you're from a small village, tiny village, not connected to the rest of the world. You grew up your whole life in this tiny village, and the only two types of drinks they had there were water and milk. Those are the only two drinks you've ever had in your entire life. There's water, clear, refreshing, you can see through it. And then there's milk, cloudy, kind of thicker, better when cold. Now, if you left that village and the first time you had orange juice, your mind would be blown. Your mind would be completely blown. You would be like, what is this crazy? I can't tell what it's the wrong color to be a drink. It's too sharp to be a drink. I can't see through it, but it's not, it's not cloudy. I can't see through it, and it's sharp. What is this insane creation? And, then there would be Coca-Cola, and then there would be whiskey, and then there would be all these other things that you just didn't have the capacity to understand. I feel like lots of people come from that ignorance, and I am ignorant about so many things. And I've learned so much coming to Sweden. I've learned so much growing up. I learned a couple of years before I left America that lesbians could be boring. I know that seems like it's incredibly obvious, but I had never met a boring lesbian until I worked at a certain hotel. Because all the lesbians I'd met had been fascinating, interesting people. Not always good people, but fascinating people. And then I met one who was just boring. And it was sad because it shattered my worldview. But you have to acknowledge your ignorance if you want to learn. And I acknowledge my ignorance on this. I've never had anybody be able to explain it to me in a succinct way what a man is. And I've tried. Don't think I haven't tried. I've looked it up. I've done research on it. Most people can't agree because it seems to be based on culture. Some cultures, you have to kill a certain type of animal to become a man. Some cultures, you after your first drink. Some cultures, not until you actually have children. So because this idea is so liquid and means different things to different people, it's really hard for me to understand why so many people are so angry and defensive about it. I knew lots of people who, when they were playing with their Mr. and Mrs. Potato Heads when they were kids, they would switch up which features went on which because they were interchangeable. You could put the woman eyes and the man mustache. You could. They were entirely interchangeable because the only reason Mrs. Potato Head probably existed was to sell to a wider demographic. It's the reason that She-Ra existed, because He-Man was selling really good. And they were like, wow, what if we could double this by selling to girls? So it's one of those things where, because I don't understand gender, I don't understand why people are so mad about it. Like, I can understand if somebody misgenders you, why you would be mad about it. You define yourself as a certain thing. You don't want to be called another thing. If somebody called a Muslim a Jew, I can see why that would make them upset. But then again, I can also see if your name is Bob and somebody insists every day on calling you Mike, that would piss me off too. You're like, my name is Bob. Okay, Mike, whatever. No, seriously, my name is Bob. Mike, I'm tired of talking about your name. Mike, come over here and do this. My name's not fucking Mike. So, what I don't understand is there's a lot of people angry who aren't being personally offended. There's a lot of people angry at other people wanting to be called Bob because that's their name. And it doesn't really matter what you think about somebody else's name. And honestly, it doesn't really matter what's in somebody else's pants unless you're trying to get in there. And if you're trying to get in there and you want to be sure, then yeah, ask. Sure. And if they have a problem with asking, then yeah, and I mean, this is after you're already dating, presumably. But it's one of those things where you don't walk up to strangers and immediately go, hey, tell me about your sex parts. Generally not something you do with strangers. Not something you really even do with friends for the most part. I don't walk up to other guys and literally say, hey, how big's your dick? It's just not something we do. I mean, I'm sure some people did that when they were younger. But, I don't really talk to people about any of their plumbing. I don't go, man, how big of a poop did you have last night? It's just not something that comes up. But if you're interested in somebody and you're not sure, well, you better be pretty interested, because it's not really your problem if you're not planning to sleep with them. You shouldn't be checking people out in the bathroom. I don't care what gender you identify as. I don't care what sexuality you identify as, unless you're in a very specific kind of bathroom. It's not really a spectator thing. It's mostly a passive thing. This is mine. I do this. But it's one of those things where it's just very confusing to me that so many people are super angry about other people's genitals and how they don't match their idea. And I mean, gender is really important in languages. Like not knowing that in Spanish tables are female, that'll make you mess up their thee. But in English, we really only have thee. Thee is the definitive article in English. It's the only one we have. German has der, die, and das. Spanish, la, le, and I don't know what the other one is. My Spanish is out. Being in Sweden, I'm way more likely to understand German than Spanish. Huh. But gender's important for that, and gender's important if you are literally trying to get in there. If you want to know what equipment you're playing with, cool. You can check. If you're not interested, if you are not planning to go to that next step, then it's really none of your damn business. And clothes are not gendered. Just because women have been wearing dresses for a while doesn't mean that they're only for women. For a long time, everybody wore dresses. They weren't quite as fancy. And suits are made for anybody. Ladies are allowed to wear suits. So it's one of those things where I'm really confused. I don't understand why this matters so much to people who it really shouldn't matter to. There's a lot of stuff that actually affects us. There's a lot of stuff that other people do that can affect us. In America, not being able to vote, that's a pretty big thing. The fact that you might be disproportionately locked up for a crime, pretty big thing. The fact that climate change might kill us all and 90% of it is done by giant companies, but they still want you to use a paper straw because those giant companies can't be bothered to clean up their own shit. That's a pretty big deal that other people are doing that affects you. But what somebody identifies as, and whether they're her or him or zir or M or whatever their pronouns might be, if they're your friend, it shouldn't be based on, oh, well, you kind of look like a dude, so I'm just going to call you a dude. It's none of your business. It's not your problem. And I know that there's going to be a firestorm of comments if any. There are certain of my former students who are going to argue with me here and probably share some horrible Jordan Peterson video or something. And that's fine, I guess. But most people I know, most of the people who are going to be willing to follow me are going to say, no, I don't get to tell the Muslims how Muslim they have to be before they're a real Muslim. Most of my former students are not going to gatekeep because they don't realize they're doing it. Most of you, if you are ignorant, it's because you don't know. And so this is your chance. This is your chance to acknowledge that other people can be called whatever the hell they want. If your parents named you Michael, but you hate Michael, and you want to go by John, even if it's not in your name, can't we just give John that? My name is Thomas Christopher Carley. I have never, in my time on this earth, gone by Thomas. Because until I came to Sweden and met 3 teachers and somebody at a pet store, I never liked a Tommy or a Tom or a Thomas that I'd met in my life. I knew several of them. None of them were good. But here I realize that Thomas isn't a bad name, but I don't go by Thomas. And if I introduced myself to you as Chris, and I went by Chris the entire time you knew me, and you insisted on calling me Thomas, and you weren't my boss, fuck you. My name is what I say it is. If you give me a cute nickname, even if I don't like it, I'll probably stick with it. I'm pretty simple that way. My wife's been calling me Buttface forever. It was extremely hurtful when she started doing it. We fought about it. But now we just call each other that all the time because we got through it. That's a nickname. That's not changing somebody's name or dead naming somebody. If somebody tells you their name is something, even if it's different than it used to be, make the effort. Be a human. Respect other people. This is my feelings on gender and sex and all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to get into the specifics of why sex isn't that important because it's just plumbing. And there's plenty of fun stuff you can do that doesn't involve that plumbing directly. But I guess my main problem with like people being upset about gender is that I don't understand it. I don't know how sex and gender are connected exactly. And there's enough people, I want to say that I read a study somewhere, either saying that it was red hair or blue eyes, one of those was like 2% of the population. And people born intersex is like 2% of the population. And I haven't checked this. I haven't cited it. Please, if you want to check it and cite it, that's fine. Do so in the comments. But we don't treat people who have blue eyes differently because they have blue eyes. There's no mandate protecting people in bathrooms from people with blue eyes. There's no thing saying that people with blue eyes can't do sports. There's no... Gender is made up. And it's one of those things that it's really stupid to get mad about somebody else's gender. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong. If you would like to try to prove me wrong, feel free. I will watch whatever. They always screw up my YouTube feed, though. I watch one Jordan Peterson video, and he shows up for the next 2 months. Like, oh, you like alt-right fascists? Here's some more. Here, have another. Here's a QAnon conspiracy for you. Good stuff. So I'll open an alternate account and watch it on that. But, yeah, do what you gotta do, guys. I'm interested. And I'm happy to answer questions. If you have questions or if you found some of this didn't make sense, then respond and tell me that I'm wrong. Or ask me why I think a certain thing. I'm fine with that. Most of you are my former students. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. You know that. I answered a question about that got me almost fired because of the school board misunderstanding stuff. It wasn't the school board. It was PTA, sorry. Anyway, if you're watching this and you made it to this point, I probably love you. I probably think you're great. And I probably think you're worth my time. And I hope that I've been worth your time. So feel free to like or comment or subscribe or whatever it is that you kids do these days. And I'm not going to ask for that because if you're not enjoying being here, don't be here. You got way more important stuff to do. And take care. Maybe I'll see you again. Sweden's kind of small.